W-I-N-N-I-P-E-G, Winnipeg is where you find me. W-I-N-N-I-P-E-G, Winnipeg is where you find me. Since I was a little guy, this place has always caught my eye. The winter's fun and summer's hot. Now sing along with all you've got.
Hello and welcome to this episode of 6 Degrees of Portage and Maine, the podcast where we talk about Winnipeggers who have outperformed Winnipeg's small city status. And today we have the one, the only, Mr. Earl Barish with us. And if you're anybody in Winnipeg who's been in the business community, you know the legend of Earl. So Earl, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Fred. Appreciate it.
So I'm looking at what's over your head, and I'm guessing we're not coming from Winnipeg right now.
No, we're fortunate to be somewhere else where it's just a teeny bit warmer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So is this your pretty much normal life now? Is the winters away from Winnipeg?
Yeah, that started with a week or two, and then over the years we managed to increase that, and I guess we've come to the realization that we never understood when we were younger that at some point in time, instead of perhaps fighting the battle against the weather, that it might be advantageous to go to a location where it's a little bit easier to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we start a little bit with, where you grew up in Winnipeg and sort of take us on the path of how you've evolved to be who you are now.
Well, I'm a North Ender, but before I got there, I was born in Fort William, now called Thunder Bay, at the McKellar General Hospital.
Okay.
And when my parents decided to go to Winnipeg, when I was 4 years old, I had a very tough decision and decided that it's probably best to accompany them. So I did, and ended up in Winnipeg when I was 4. We had a couple of residences on Boyd Avenue, a couple of stores on Aberdeen and Boyd, and the majority of the time we spent on Aberdeen Avenue, just about a block and a half from Aberdeen in Maine. Coincidentally, that became the source of my very first business connection. Colecus was at the corner of Aberdeen and Maine. And virtually 2 or 3 times a week, I would go and clean the garbage up for them and clean around their building. And I would get a hot dog and fries as my reward for doing that when I was 10. And as a result of that, one of my favorite meals is a very, very good hot dog. If you can find them, it's a really good meal to have. Yeah. So, I grew up there. The next spot that we moved to was Semple and McGregor in West Kildonan. And along with that came the introduction of Dickie D Ice Cream into our family. As a little bit of a story, my good friend Frankie Winkler lived on Smithfield Avenue, and one day said, we were 14 years of age, said, Earl, let's go make some money. And so we've got a little bit more freedom. My next door neighbor, Sid Glow, owns Dickie D Ice Cream, and let's go ride an ice cream bike. So in 1957 and 1958, I rode an ice cream bike. In those days, ice cream was 10 cents each. And we were able to sell, or I was able to sell anyway, $60 worth of ice cream a day. I think the numbers would be so large now if you use today's prices, I can't even imagine. And I got my 20% commission, which was $12. So in 1957, $12 a day was a lot of money for a young guy. Sid Glow, was a very fine man, was also an electrical engineer, an electrical contractor, and the summertime was a very busy time for him. And so for over a year, he discussed selling Dickie D Ice Cream, and would we be interested, because we were the better salesman as far as how much we were selling. My dad, Alva Sholem, was a cattle buyer. So he was away 3 weeks of the month, virtually into Saskatchewan or parts of Ontario, which is the nature of being a cattle buyer at that point in time. And 1958 was a very difficult year, the cattle business, and that is a bit of a gamble. You pay a price and you take it to a market and you hope that the market's going to be higher than what you paid. It wasn't in 1958, and we never found out as a family how much money my father lost inadvertently through this change in the values. But we didn't have very much money left, but we had just enough with a little bit of a bank loan to buy 8 ice cream bicycles from Sid Glow, which is what Dickie D Ice Cream was in 1958, and started in 1959 with the 8 bicycles on a journey, a family journey to build the company. And
so how old were you at this time?
Born in 43, so I was 15, just turning 16 years of age.
And starting your empire.
Well,
amazing.
Yeah, and then of necessity I actually went to university when I was 15 years of age, because you could do it then. My sisters, my older sisters, I'm the youngest of 4, used to teach me and talk to me when I was much younger and read to me and do all sorts of things. And when I started in kindergarten, they immediately moved me to grade 1. They said, you're too advanced for kindergarten. There is no grade 12. You could take grade 12 or first year university, one or the other. So after grade 11, I went into university at 15 years of age, and I graduated when I was 19. So I had my Bachelor of Commerce at 19 years of age. So that's the educational background. And during that time, we grew Dickie D Ice Cream. The biggest, there were a couple of significant times during the growth of that company. The first part was the year after we bought Dickie D, several of the vendors who had been selling and their parents were buying ice cream bikes. So all of a sudden, we were now faced with this competition. We were just trying to learn the business and grow the business. The ice cream bikes were made in Chicago. We made a trip to Chicago, a family trip to Chicago, and talked to the person there and made an arrangement with them that we would buy 75 bikes. Now, this is at a time when we had grown from 8 to 12. So we had 12 bikes, but we made the arrangements to buy over 3 years, 25 bikes each year for 3 years in order to have exclusivity on the bikes. And as a family, we decided to do that. And all of a sudden, we were in the franchising, quote unquote, business, because we didn't know that word then. We didn't understand what franchising was. And basically, it was a distributorship because we didn't have large fees up front. What we really had was finding people year after year in other cities to grow Dickie D. So it was almost a forced growth. Some people give me way too much credit for some of the things I've been able to do. It's not because I was any more brilliant than anybody else. It was just that if you're involved in a business and you want to grow the business, sometimes you have to do things, or things come to you and you have to say yes and follow through and then make it work. And that's what we did, is we made it work. And so eventually we grew the business. In 1968, my brother moved to Toronto. He looked after east of Thunder Bay and right to the coast. And I looked after Thunder Bay right to Vancouver Island. And we grew together and apart, in the sense of we did things that made sense together in terms of purchasing and things of that nature. But we ran our own businesses because the nature of Canada is so diverse from one end to the other. You have to be able to adapt to the circumstance if you want to be successful in business.
So my obscure question for this
Sure.
is, were all the franchises or all the different areas selling the same ice cream? Where did you get your ice cream from?
Well, in Winnipeg, we were dealing with People's Co-op. which was on Dufferin Avenue,
Oh, yeah.
and McGregor. But then we ran into a problem. They couldn't make enough ice cream for us. And a very nice man by the name of Nate Locksheen worked for Silverwood's Dairies at that time.
Okay.
And he came to see us and he said, why don't you give us some business? We did. And eventually they became our major supplier, even as they became Alt and Unilever and so on. They became our major supplier where
Mhm.
they functioned. But they, in the Western Canada in particular, the cooperatives were much larger in terms
Mhm.
of their and their coverage was much better in each province. So I had arrangements with Alpha Dairies in Calgary, NADP in Northern Alberta Dairy Pool in Edmonton, the Saskatchewan Co-op and Dairyland in BC. So they're not connected. They're all,
Mhm.
they're not connected in any way. They're individual companies. And I had to negotiate with each one because the key to the business was that we had the equipment to put you in the business, but the dairy had the ice cream
Mhm.
that was necessary for you to be in the business.
Mhm.
And so we made arrangements with the dairies, and so our distributors could go and pick up or have delivered from their various locations.
Mhm. Hopefully, they didn't ride their bike out to a farm like 90 miles away.
No, no, the distributors were the ones in charge of all the kids on the bike, so
Okay.
they did their truck or their car.
Got
A
it.
very yeah, a very significant decision that I made in the early '80s was quite important in terms of the growth of our company. In the early '80s, there was rampant inflation, way more rampant than we have. Interest rates are up to 18, 20%. People were downsizing products. People were changing chocolate, real chocolate, to pretend chocolate or
Mhm.
whatever they use now, chocolate compound, but it's not as pure as it used to be in order to
Mhm.
try and survive. In the ice cream industry, the size of a regular Revelo, or a fudge sickle, not a fudgicle. People call it a fudgicle. It is not. It is a fudge sickle. Because if you
Mhm.
call it a fudgicle, then you have to call it a popicle and a dreamicle because you're leaving out the word sickle, which is the brand. So the
Mhm.
fudgesicle, in the usual shape, was 85 milliliters. And um, what happened is they decided to make the product smaller and they crimped, it's called the mold, and made it 75 milliliters. So they made it smaller.
Mhm.
That year, I made the decision to go exactly the opposite. There had been the red, white, and blue rocket shape. It's a shape like a rocket. It's
Mhm.
125 milliliters. And if you take any product, whatever product it is, expanding the size doesn't mean you expand proportionately the cost,
Mhm.
right? The stick is the stick. The wrapper is the wrapper. It might cost a little more if it's a little bigger, and the ingredients in most things, perfume, the ingredients is the least costly part of the perfume. It's the bottle that they put it in that costs
Mhm.
much more than the perfume. As a result of that, we were able to I created something called the Space Fleet because it was called a jet or a rocket. And the red, white, and blue one that was prominent in Canada and the United States. But I took the Revelo and moved it from the shape it was in into the rocket shape and called it the Space Jumbo Bar. I took the fudgesicle and we made the Space Jumbo Fudge. Took the creamsicle and we called it the Space Shot. And and there was one other product. It was a banana chocolate compound that we put into as an ice cream item, and it was called the Space Split. And I created a 6 item space fleet. We had the exclusivity in Canada for the mold for 10 years, from 1981 to 1991. So anybody that wanted that particular mold product had to buy it through Dickie D, either through us or in the local cities through the people who were distributing on the bicycles, they were given the exclusivity to that product through the process of becoming the distributor that looked after the city. We sold Dickie D in September 1992 to Unilever Good Humor Briars. At that point, we had approximately 1,500 bicycles from coast to coast in Canada. We had 45 scooters, 6 trucks, and we also had business that I started to do in the northern parts of United States. And we had also developed another bar, which, if you have a moment, I would like to tell you about. But we sold at that point the entire company right from coast to coast to Unilever Good Humor Briars.
Okay. So how long did it take you? Sorry, I'm going to forget this question if I don't ask. How long did it take you from selling the company to realizing I can't be retired?
Well, 5 minutes. My wife would tell you 30 seconds. I'll get back to the other product in a moment, but to answer that question for you, the good humor people were very nice to give me an opportunity to be a consultant for 1 year after I sold the company. I don't understand why they do that. I think it's the best job I've ever had in my life. When you've already given all the company, and I would have told them anything they wanted to know about. They didn't have to pay me as a consultant, and they never called me once in a year. So I like that particular job. I haven't been able to duplicate that over the years. So that went on from September 92 to September 93. During that year, I finished the first 6 months of that year. I finished off the creation of about 8 or 10 ice cream items that I was working on without knowing that I no longer would own the company. The ice cream industry was a little slow in creating new products, especially face products, which you see now, the Superman or Batman or, I can't remember the names of the kids' kinds of faces where you open it and you see a different face. It's a different process. It's a more costly process, but kids love to be eating SquarePants. Bob SquarePants, what's his name?
SpongeBob.
You're way more knowledgeable than I am. Anyway, so I started creating these new products. And so I spent the 6 months finishing all that off. As a matter of fact, one of them became their top product and in future years after we sold. And the second 6 months, in the creation of that, I came across Pop Rocks, the kind you get in a package, small little package, you put it in your mouth. Heat and moisture are the things that set it off. It starts to pop and crackle in your mouth. And it gives you that feeling that you don't get any other way. And so we started to create a product called the Shock Pop. And the Shock Pop had Pop Rocks on the outside of the product. The real key with popping candy is that because heat and moisture are their enemies, and you use heat and moisture in the creation of many products, the question was, how can you make something with Pop Rocks in it and that where it retains its poppability? Because if it goes through a process of heat or moisture, it loses all its poppability, and by the time it's finished, even if you freeze it, there's no more popping.
I don't think I've ever heard the word poppability.
I don't know. I'm not sure there is a word like that. So I may use a few other words that have never been used before. Anyway, so I determined through a few experiences that it's necessary to have something else that will protect the popping of the Pop Rocks. And I hearkened back to my past where, and we've all experienced this, we would go into probably a Dairy Queen or an ice cream store, and we would get a soft ice cream, and we'd ask them to dip it into some chocolate. They turn it over and dip it into the chocolate, and then they'd bring it back up, and all of a sudden it would harden and and become hard, the chocolate. Well, how did that happen? If I dipped it in chocolate, that's not going to happen. So that was one thing. The second thing was when we created this other bar that I wanted to mention to you when I get a chance. The problem with the high quality ice cream bars, whether it's Haagen-Dazs, Dove, or whatever, including the one that we had called Richard D's, when you bite into it, the chocolate breaks. Oftentimes the chocolate breaks and falls down or on your clothes or whatever. So why in one case is it hardening and the other case it's breaking? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the... No, that's something different. The answer is oil. There's a world company called Loaders Croklaan that is, all they do is sell oils to different companies for production purposes. I went to Loaders Croklaan and presented them with a challenge. Find me an oil, create one that will allow me to make ice cream with Pop Rocks in it or on it, that'll protect the Pop Rocks so that it'll have its poppability, its popping feature at the end. And they did. They took it on as a challenge. They realized the benefit because they're located throughout the world. They're the source of oil. By the way, owned by Unilever, coincidentally. Not that I'm not sure they might know now, years later, that that's what I did, but it's their company that actually gave me the answer to the inclusion of popping candy, Pop Rocks, into ice cream products and other products. So I had created this product called the Shock Pop, and my original idea in terms of answering your question about how long did it take to sort of go and do something different. I had a 5-year non-competition clause in North America in ice cream. But what I did is create the Shock Pop, and I was going to run around the world or have somebody run around the world there's 9 locations that you have to patent, and you have to, get all your legal documents in place and so on. It's a very expensive process, time consuming and so on, but start a company that would sell Shock Pops. We would help them how they made it, and we would get some royalty on whatever, they sold. Well, in the last 6 months, I learned that large companies do not like to pay royalties. They pay their employees a reasonable amount of money. They have enough employees to create these new items. They don't want Earl Barish coming around and then they owe him 2 cents, 5 cents, whatever, it doesn't matter, on every single one, and they're selling millions of them and they're paying somebody else to create the item. So they don't like doing that. So they either say no and do nothing, or they steal the idea. Not really steal it, they change it just a little bit enough that they can, create. So fortunately, I learned that in the second part of my consulting job. So I changed the nature of what I was doing. Instead of having a product, buy this product, I created it as an ingredient. So at this point in time, there was world markets now, and people were starting to get ice cream, had bananas, nuts, cherries, other things that were included. They weren't really in the inclusions where now they have all sorts of things inside or on top of things. That's the growth part that you're looking at now. But in those particular days, it's an ingredient. Now, if I could make Pop Rocks an ingredient, then people could buy it. And so we sent a package of the ingredients to marketing people in the largest dairies in the world. to their marketing people. And anybody who's a marketing person
Mm-hmm.
would be there would be tweaked to the fact that maybe there's something here that would be exciting or would be different, and would respond back and they say, "Oh yes, how do I use this?" And then we get into the oil and how they use it and how they can make a product. Now, before all this happened, my wife and I flew to Spain. Why Spain? If you looked at the back of a package of Pop Rocks, you'd find it's made by Zeta Especial, at least at that point in time. Zeta Especial, Senor Escola and Baez are the two chemists that created Pop Rocks. And they had a company where they sold the Pop Rocks. But in the late 80s, this is just prior to my getting involved, there was a lawsuit between Zeta and Kraft of Chicago at that point. And ultimately, towards the end of the 80s, it was decided that the company with the rights to Pop Rocks, the exclusive rights to the patents, was Zeta Especial, and Kraft was forced to send all of their equipment and all of their product to Spain. And so now Spain had a world monopoly. So when I discussed with the people in Spain who didn't speak English, and I don't speak Spanish, they didn't have an interpreter, and I didn't have an interpreter, but the whole common word was Unilever. They heard Unilever, and they know Unilever, and we flew on a Valentine's Day in 1994, just after my consultancy was over with Unilever, and to Spain, and had a nice lunch one day, and the next day we signed a contract with them to be the distributor of bulk Pop Rocks for inclusion in ice cream products. And when you get rights from them, you get world rights because there's nobody else that has the Pop Rocks. So that's how the business started. We started sending out different samples, started working. The Spaniards, no understanding of how to support people in the business with their needs and their marketing and whatever, but we knew how to do that. My son worked with me on this Pop Rocks. And eventually, and because it was an ingredient now, we didn't tell anybody what they needed to do. They created their own product. They decided whether they wanted to put it in it, on it, a little bit on the tip of it. They decided on the name, the promo, the TV ad, Boca Loca in South America, they're yelling Boca Loca, which is something to do with Pop Rocks. T-shirts in New Zealand and in Australia, all over. They all had their opportunity for their marketing people to be totally creative, and all we were doing, in quotes, is selling them the popping candy and initially helping them. We actually shipped oil from Rexdale, Ontario, across the waters to the first few countries. And then the rest of the Loaders Croklaan companies that were in Europe and so on, who the dairies dealt with anyway, started to make the product for them. And we weren't interested in shipping barrels of oil across the country,
Right.
across the world. We wanted to sell the Pop Rocks. So that, the exclusivity, so to speak, for ice cream, I traded took me 2 days to convince them to make a trade. I gave up the exclusivity of the ice cream industry for Nestle's exclusivity, which they agreed to. So for a couple of years, I had the opportunity. Any Pop Rock sold to Nestle's, the largest food company with 5 different divisions in the world, they had to buy the popping candy through me. So,
amazing.
and
I was just in the Nestle building.
were you?
Yeah. I mentioned I was just coming from my Toastmasters meeting, and we have our Toastmaster meeting in that building.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Nestle's, of course, one of their main things is chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And chocolate is much easier to deal with because it's made with oil. And by the way, back to what I said before with the coming up with the oil, the more oil you use, the more the product will harden. And the less oil the less oil you use, which is on a pure like a Haagen-Dazs bar and so on, it cracks. It doesn't have enough of the product to keep it together. It just cracks.
Mhm.
So, and that's how the oil became the answer to the question of protection. You have to have the right blend, of course, to protect it.
So it's like a binding agent, or gives it a certain
Right.
elasticity or something.
I left all of that to Loder's Croklaan. They
Mhm.
figured all that out, but yeah, that's what basically it does. It allows as a product like Pop Rocks to go to a certain temperature. There is a limit, but to a
Mhm.
certain temperature, and if they can go to that limit and still retain its popping ability, then they're successful. And they were able to
Mhm.
do that because after that the temperature comes down and then goes into a freezer. And at that point in time, it's been protected to the portion of the production process that potentially could make it where you could lose the popping ability of that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't. I'd like to go back to one thing to do with Dickie D, which is a very important part of it. And I want to acknowledge my brother in particular for creating the Richard D's bar. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but in the late 80s, 1988 to be exact, that's when Haagen-Dazs, more so Dove, and came out with these super high quality in a box
Mhm.
rather than just a bag, product. And we wanted to have a product like that. And my brother worked with a group of people, and we created a bar called the Richard D's Bar. And you know why we called it the Richard D's Bar? Because Dicky grew up and became Richard. So Dickie D the Richard D's Bar, and seriously, that's how it was named,
Mhm.
was a delightful bar. In 1988, there are quotas of bringing ice cream into Canada, and milk and ice cream products.
Right.
So no one was able, like Haagen-Dazs and all these companies were not able to bring their product into Canada. You need quota, and there's no quota available in order to do that. So this particular product, the Richard D's Bar, we had 3 years of where we were the only company that had a ice cream in a box, quality Lady Godiva chocolate, whisper of maple syrup, and it was a
Mhm.
very popular. And we sold it then. We came out at $1.75 when 50 cents was what all the other products were, and we wondered whether we'd even be able to sell it at that
Mhm.
point for that price. Eventually, we developed the space cabinet. It's a freezer with a space kind of top to it.
Mhm.
We did a planogram. The planogram included the Richard D's bar. The planogram included an Elan bar, a yogurt, the strawberry yogurt bar made in the United States, in a box as well, high quality, and then a few other items. And those cabinets, we placed 5,500 of them across Canada from 1988 to 1991 before any of the other companies were able to bring their product in. So every Blockbuster video shop, every
Mhm.
Esso station across Canada, every sports facility, and many other smaller people had these cabinets, and you were able to get the Richard D's Bar. The Richard D's Bar sold when still under our control, when we still had the company, as high as at the sporting events at $5, $4. There's no problem. It was a delightful bar that my brother created, and that was and the reason for wanting to mention that certainly would have been one of the reasons why the Unilever decided to buy Dickie D Ice Cream. Unilever and Nestle fight the world over for market share. They usually
Mhm.
each have in their 40s, and then there's some independent company that has the other part of the percentage of the business. In Canada, neither of them had anything. So they were in a battle to grow their share of the marketplace. And Mr. Unilever, somewhere in England, who knows where he was, looked down on Canada and said, buy Dickie D Ice Cream first. No idea why they did that. If I were him, I would never have done that, because Dickie D Ice Cream is a family business. It's a family, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, if necessary, every day during the summer and our short 4-month summer season. You know, it's not a corporate kind of a business. And eventually it suffered and hardly exists now because of that. It was purchased, and we took a year to decide whether we wanted to buy that to sell, because it was a family business. We all had children that were growing up, and to leave them. The best thing we did was selling the company. It put us in a position to help our children to do the things that they wanted to do, not to do the things that we thought that they should do. And it's worked out very well in that way.
So, Earl, I'd like to pivot a little bit about talking about maybe some of the other super entrepreneurs that you've crossed paths with in Winnipeg.
Super entrepreneurs that I've crossed paths with in Winnipeg. You would have had to have let me know that in advance to be prepared. I have to think about that.
Yeah.
I grew a lot of what I did with people. I always give credit to the people who were there and helped and did whatever, but you wouldn't call any of them super entrepreneurs. You'd call them all dedicated, hardworking, capable, employees and part of the team and whatever. But I'd have to think about the answer. I don't have that one.
And this is how you can tell this is totally unscripted, ladies and gentlemen.
You can cut that out. It's okay.
We'll leave it in, because it's hard. When you're in a small business or a not so small business, you're just so immersed in what you have to do at that time that it's kind of hard to see all the peripheral and what's going on. So I know there's the Kievises who were pretty creative.
Well, Raymond and I went to school together. I knew Phil very well. And I know them. Well, actually, when I went to Australia in 1970, I actually used their office in Australia when their records, when they're doing their K-Tel records and so on. So I did. I mean, what they did was phenomenal. No question. And they were good enough, as I say, in 1970. I was looking at expanding. That's another story. I was looking at expanding Dickie D Ice Cream into Australia as the opposite season. Not the salespeople, but the managers. 4 months in Canada, 2 months holiday, 4 months in Australia, 2 months holiday, and keep doing that. Because over the time of the 8 months when you're in Canada and you have 8 months you're not working, you tend to find something else. And when it comes time to be ready for the ice cream again, you were off doing something different. So anyway, the Kievises for sure. If you name me some names, Sandy Schindelman has done superb.
Yeah. I also have a fondness for the Kalekis family, because when I was going to university,
Mary?
I worked at Eaton's downtown, and they had a grocery store in the basement, and they bought all their meats from Eaton's downtown butcher shop. And they would come in, gentlemen would come in. I didn't know he was a Mr. Kalekis. And, they'd buy tons, just ridiculous amounts of meat. And I didn't know that we were supposed to give them special pricing. So, I'm in my third month there, and I ring up what probably was $1,800 of meat. And, he's a premier customer. I had no idea. And he didn't blink. He didn't blink an eye. Went through the cash register with everything. I was supposed to just tell my boss, and he would bill him. And then he said, "Do you want to take the groceries out for me?" Which we've never done. So I did that, and
Sure.
he tipped me quite well for whatever year that was, and said, "Come by for a burger."
Really? Well,
Yeah.
Mary, I know the Collectus as well because, as I told you, I started my career at
Mhm.
10 years of age, and Mary, and then I've been there. I used to go there often. When were you at Eaton's downtown? What year? Do you
Uh,
remember?
it was probably like late 80s.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a career at Eaton's downtown and the
Mhm.
Bay, but that's a whole lot. That was when I graduated. When I was at the age of 19, as I mentioned to you, I had a 7-year period in the retail business at the Bay
Mhm.
and at Eaton's, where I
Mhm.
learned some other very important management things because I was the store manager of one of the stores and was able to, at a young age, hang out with the senior executives at different meetings and see things in action and so on,
Mhm.
which was certainly a part of some of the discipline I learned and needed to know when you're in your own business and what works
Mhm.
and doesn't work and how to function and whatever. So, but I was in I graduated in '63, so I was
Mhm.
63 to 67. I was in the Bay and 67 to 70 at Eaton's. So I
Mhm.
understand. I know exactly what you're talking about. I worked at. I mean, I know that both of the department stores in terms of what's located where and so on. But that's a great story. Because I
Mhm.
would have thought that it was either Winnipeg Sausage or one of these other
Mhm.
companies that they would have been buying their products from.
Maybe they did there
Surprising.
as well, but I saw Mr. Colectus come back repeatedly, repeatedly. So
That's a great story.
yeah. Um, so I also learned a lot of things at Eaton's, which were great. I mean, they were very successful at one point. And then I also learned a lot of things that I don't think managers should be doing this, but I'm not going to talk about that now. But you have to have your eyes open both ways.
Yeah, I mean, the success, the demise of Eaton's was because of the non-Eaton president who decided that he needed to make a profit on every item that was sold.
Mhm.
He changed. I can't remember his name right now, but he
Yeah.
changed the
Oop, your
philosophy.
camera fell down.
And oh, are we okay?
Yeah, if you could tip just a tip higher. There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, he changed that whole philosophy, and eventually the concept of value, which Eaton's always had to start with and grew their business on it, started to change. And people
Mhm.
started to leave because they were finding they felt they were being gouged, and eventually the company went under. So
Mhm.
I've always been a volume kind of person in all the businesses that I've been involved in. Keep your price reasonable. I probably could have sold ice cream at a much higher price for many years. And no, let's keep our customers coming and give them no reason to go anywhere else. So, yeah, you learn if you're open to learning and to watching and to growing your who you are, you
Mhm.
can learn a lot from other people and from other companies and so on.
Okay. So maybe we can move to how we went from popability to running a basketball league in Winnipeg.
Well, it's all part of my time at the YMHA.
Hmm.
Um, it actually a very brief part of it started at West Kildonan Collegiate. When I was in grade 11, grade 10, I was on the West Kildonan Collegiate team.
Hmm.
I was on the bench. We had a very strong team. Fred
Yeah.
Shane, and I can't really, I'll have to think of the names. But they're not coming to me right
Hmm.
now. But a very strong team. But I sat on the bench most of the year. But I went to all the practices.
Hmm.
Pepler was the coach. And that year, West Kildonan beat Glenlawn, which was quite unusual. Glenlawn was the powerhouse, and
Hmm.
half the team graduated. I'm now in grade 11. It's now time for me to play basketball. The principal of West Kelowna Collegiate was O.V. Jewett. Tough guy with a heart of gold. People just didn't understand him, but he came tough and he made tough decisions. When our team failed, a good number of them failed the math course that he taught, he canceled the entire program before we'd even started. So I never had a chance to play basketball because by university, there's no way I was anywhere near good enough to even qualify at university. But I was ready to play at West Kelowna. So I was a frustrated basketball player. So that's how a frustrated basketball player gets involved in a basketball league. And by the way, if you want to make a little bit of money, you take a lot of money and get involved in a minor league team. And at the end of the day, the Pop Rocks were fueling the losses in basketball. So not everything in my career has been a success. It was a success from the fans' point of view and what we provided for them. We copied an NBA concept in terms of dance teams, mascots. We were the only place at halftime you could take your shoes off and come and do the twist because we were the Cyclone. And so we had Chubby Checker playing the twist, and we had 50 people on the court dancing to the twist. I had the free throw contest for charity. We did all sorts of things. But in the year that I started in 1995, people didn't get up in the morning and say, let's go to a basketball game. They got up and said, let's go to a hockey game. So we were not ready for the basketball. But that's how, when the opportunity came, I became involved as the owner of a new league. There had been a league with the Winnipeg Thunder. Sam Cates was involved with that league. Sam took me along to a meeting in Fargo for this new league called the International Basketball Association. I decided to get involved with the team, the Winnipeg team and Winnipeg Cyclone. There were 5 of us. The fellow who started it and originated or did all the work was the fellow from Tom Anderson from Minnesota. He was in the funeral business. He was a sort of a quiet guy. And as soon as he made the announcement about the International Basketball Association, he gets inundated with media and phone calls and whatever. And he called me. I happened to be at an airport in Europe. And he called me and he said, Earl, I need your help. I said, what's up, Tom? He said, I can't be president of this league because I just don't know how to handle all these calls and people and whatever. I'm not ready to do that. You become the president. Okay. So I started out as president of the International Basketball Association in 1995. I spent 4 years as the president. The head office was Winnipeg. It's the only professional sports team that had the head office in Winnipeg. We had a $600,000 budget that came from, so we actually, spent money in Winnipeg. I was very proud of that. We grew the league to 10 teams from 5, which is not easy, with the support of Alex English, who is our commissioner, who is the Hall of Fame member and the Michael Jordan of the 80s. He scored 26,000 points in the NBA.
That Alex English, yeah. I remember him.
Yeah, they called him Flick. He played for Denver. Never gets the credit he should because Denver never went anywhere. I don't think they ever won a playoff game. But fine man, still a friend, a great guy. And he and I traveled together some of the time and grew the league to 10. The other wonderful experience I had was Daryl Dawkins. Daryl Chocolate Thunder Dawkins was our coach for 2 years. I mean, it's unfortunately at that time, people were not into basketball the way they are now. The way they are now, and we have the Winnipeg Sea Bears, and I wish and they're positioned properly at the right time and the right place and doing a phenomenal job, and I'm happy that they are. But he would have been such a draw now. He passed away at a young age, 6 or 7 years ago at the age of 58. But he was a gentle giant. He was really quite a guy. So those two helped grow the league. And then I decided A league is only as good as the owners. The owners have to understand that the business portion, let the coach do the coaching, let the players do the playing. But if all the owners aren't on the same wavelength, you can't grow anything. It becomes a problem. And unfortunately, 2 of the 10 owners came from a different thought process. And eventually, and I spent many, many hours growing. It's hard to grow a league and get a whole, a new team and all the things that are involved. And so I turned that over to somebody else for the last 2 years. I don't know if there's a bit of a story as to why it no longer, how it ended. I'll try and keep it very brief. Isaiah Thomas, the Continental Basketball Association had existed for about 56 years at that point, and the NBA were giving money to them, $1 million or $2 million. And they saw the growth of our league, and Alex English and I were in the NBA office in New York 3 times, and it looked like that they were going to give us at least half of the money to grow our league because they liked what they saw in the people who were involved. And then Isaiah Thomas came along and purchased the Continental Basketball Association. And he owned all the teams, so he got all the revenue, but he also owned all the debt and basically bankrupted the league. And so teams that had been there for a multi-number of years, their owners were upset because to see this happen. And so 4 of those owners decided they wanted back into basketball. And 4 of the owners from our IBA decided that they would amalgamate. And because the CBA was better known in terms of how long it'd been there, it became the CBA and the new CBA. And I had lost a lot of money in the last year that I did basketball. I paid for an opportunity if I wanted to, an option for 1 year, and then I decided I had enough. So from 1995 to 2001, I had 6 years of coming in to watch players who know how to play basketball to offset what happened to my basketball career. Very costly decision.
If you still had the ice cream business, Chocolate Thunder would be far and away your best seller. The Dawkins bar.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. I like that. You can join my marketing team. You qualify.
Thanks.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
That's what you get for an Asper MBA.
There you go. Good. Yes, that's one of the things for sure.
So you couldn't stay retired again, and you got yourself into a totally different business again. Although I guess it's food.
Salisbury House.
Yeah.
So Salisbury House. So just so you understand, I got involved, Cheryl and I got involved in 2001, which is just at the time that the basketball was ending. And we became silent investors. 2 Winnipeggers had reached out to a group and selected the people that they would like to be the owners of Salisbury House, because the ownership was in Quebec, in Montreal. And they wanted to bring the ownership back to Winnipeg, to Manitoba. And it so happened to be after the experience that I had with the basketball, I said, okay, I'm going to invest in some other things and let other people make them work. And instead of my having to work, and it was the 6 years in basketball was, very time consuming. Plus I had the Pop Rocks at that same time still. And there's a story about how that ended at another time. The Turks got involved to get patents, and the Spaniards weren't happy, and blah, blah, blah. There's a whole world story about what happened and the current situation in Pop Rocks. But anyway, so we became silent investors in 2001. In 2006, when I really decided to retire, I got a phone call that Salisbury House was in trouble, and that a couple of the decisions made by some of the owners had put them in a very difficult position. And there's a huge story that you can cover at another time.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, they asked me if I would parachute in and take over Salisbury House. Well, I said it took me a month or two to decide. I mean, I had all the
Mhm.
credentials, right? I had in the food area, I sold ice cream only. The ice cream was packaged already. It wasn't in the production, and it
Mhm.
was sold on mobile equipment, not in stationary stores. And it was sold for 4 months during the year and nothing the 8 months. So that's my food experience. Then
Mhm.
I have Pop Rocks. I mean, it's candy. I sold it to other people, and they did all the creation and they did all the work with the Pop Rocks. I had a basketball team. Now that sounds like I'm built for a restaurant business, does it not?
Mhm.
So I eventually decided, because there were 600 employees for Salisbury House at that point, that I would take over the responsibility. And I figured in 6 months or a year, I could solve what the problems were. And I was prepared to invest my time and energy at that point. 2006, what was I, 63
Mhm.
years of age. I started as the president and CEO in Salisbury House, where virtually everything had to be fixed. Not major fixes in all cases, but everything had been neglected, as often what happened through this kind of process. We never did go bankrupt. We did apply for coverage, Chapter 11 kind of concept of necessity. I did things that I never knew about, never heard about, never knew anybody had to do, because I was never involved in that kind of a situation. But my goal was to save Salisbury House. That was my goal. And I made a couple of the most difficult decisions in my life during that period of time. And just, I spent 11 years there to 2017 before the company was, before I sold the company. Cheryl and I owned 70% of the company at that point in time. We bought in at 20% in 2001, and I
Mhm.
purchased the others along the way. If I was going to do all this work, I should at least have, a major share. And I had great support from the partners, which was also very helpful. I had a great team, and I did the smartest thing. I stuck to one part of the business only, the marketing and the brand development, which is where my strength happens to be. And the operations is in the hand of a guy who did it for 20 years and is now the president and CEO, and the marketing and so on. Sorry, not the marketing, the production of the food. I
Mhm.
couldn't, if I cooked breakfast for you, you'd never come back to Salisbury House ever again. So
Mhm.
I have no skills in a lot of the there, but I have skills in interpersonal relationships and brand development. And what I thought would be 6 months or a year, was 11 years, and I sold the company in December of 2017.
Mhm.
Little bit of a follow-up story that you're never supposed to do. Once you sell, you're never supposed to buy back in. Like,
Right.
you're done. Um, So in 2019, it became clear, which is a year early in that, so about a little over a year and not quite a year and a half, it became clear that one of the three people, there was a group of three different groups, I should say, purchased the company, that one of the people involved, who was the major person, was not, it wasn't, the company wasn't working under his guidance. And there's a potential for all the hard work to go down the tube, because it doesn't take long in any
Mhm.
business if you start doing things that don't, that your clientele, your customers, your guests aren't happy with. And so I did they made the decision. And in 2019, it was in February, I bought back into Salisbury House. So the current situation is, between the senior management of the company and Cheryl and I, we own 51% of the company. I am now chair of the board, but obviously have a connection to the company and the current president, Brad Cramble, is a great guy, and he was my VP for all the period of time that I was the president. So we chat about things, but the best thing, then the difference now is when we hang up, he has to deliver everything and I don't. But we still consult, and I still am involved a bit in the marketing and some of the promos, some of the wild, crazy things that I've tended to do over my life in all different areas that I've worked in that have been reasonably successful. And I'm very happy with where Salisbury House is now. I was, very smart, right? 2019, 1 year before COVID, to get back involved in Salisbury House, and but we've maneuvered through that period of time, and we're doing reasonably well, and we're happy with the size that we are. We're smaller than we were before, but we're focused on full service and focused on our guests, where we had various types of service levels in different locations. So we're always running fine, but that's the Salisbury House story.
So I believe I've only been to two Sal's. The one on, I think, is Matheson in Maine.
Maine and Matheson, yes.
And the one near the bay, maybe on Graham.
Oh, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, we had family that owned a couple of shoe stores that were right fronting onto Portage. So you'd walk out the back door and it was there it was. So, but after a night of partying, Sal's on Main, that was the place.
Oh, that was the place to go. There's no question. After, there were more people in suits and gowns and all dressed up in that restaurant than any other restaurant in the city, because we started 24-hour operations. All our locations, all our larger locations, were 24 hours until COVID. They're not back there. Nobody's really back in the 24-hour business because things have changed dramatically in that way. But so after an event, I mean, you ate at 6:30 and you nibbled at 11 o'clock or dessert or whatever. By 1 o'clock, you needed some food. So you went to a Salisbury House. Funniest story was a lady who said in Calgary, I was in Calgary, he said, I was at that restaurant at least 8 or 10 times. There's only one problem. I don't remember any of them because I was so drunk just looking for food. I don't remember what it looked like or anything. So it was a place. It became a place to go. Of course, Burton Cummings lived a couple of blocks from there. That was his hangout. So people went there to maybe see or talk to him and so on.
The Sal's on Main?
Yeah, Maine and Matheson. That was his place. The Rosh Pina Synagogue. He used to hang out there and meditate. And the Salisbury on Maine and Matheson was his location. Yeah.
So there's always been a rumor that there's a house, I think, on Forest Park and St. Clair that was always rumored to be Randy Bachman's house or his mother's house. It was always immaculate. The yard work was immaculate, but for as long as I can remember, we were told that was a Bachman residence.
I don't know. I know Randy and I went to school together at West Kelowna, same time, same year. So, but I've had much more contact with Burton because Burton was a partner in Salisbury House, and so that's sort of where I was focused much more. So I don't really know. I mean, he went to West Kelowna, and so it's quite possible. St. Clair is in Toronto. You're thinking of the different cross street. There's no St. Clair in Winnipeg.
No, Sinclair.
Sinclair, that's it. Yeah. Forest Park and Sinclair. It could be the closest high school there would be probably West Kelowna. Yeah, so that could very well be, but I can't confirm that.
Okay. Well, maybe next time you talk to Burton, if you do, you can pose that question to him.
So you don't pose questions to Burton about Randy.
Oh, I thought they were good again.
Well, they are. They're off and on. You never know. So
it's
not normally the regular process. But the next time I see Randy, whenever I see him, sometimes I've seen him in an airport or whatever, I'll ask him for sure. That's no problem.
I used to bartend at the convention center, and Burton came out of one of his hiatuses. He he has a thing about being a New Year's baby, or he used to have a thing about
He is.
that. Yeah, yeah. And he decided he was going to come do solo dinners for New Year's Eve at the convention center.
Yes.
So I was assigned to be the bartender for this, 150 seat select audience. It was just wild. I mean, such a talent.
And
Him
what?
and his keyboards, and that was it.
Yeah.
No band.
Just
What a
this
voice.
is up close and alone. His solo show. He's
Mhm,
phenomenal. I mean, his ability is not in question.
mhm,
I had a couple of sort of off events. For example, I brought Anna Kournikova and Monica Seles to Winnipeg for an exhibition match. She actually
mhm,
hit me on the side of my cheek. I don't wash that side of my cheek anymore.
mhm,
But I had a couple of musical nights, one at the park at the where the Gold Eyes play,
mhm.
and one at the convention center called A Night to Remember. And Burton was at both of them. And it was, yeah, he's a talent. There's no question about his
Mhm.
talent over the years, and he's touring right now as we speak.
Mhm.
Um, he's due in Palm Springs in a couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So he's a real talent that's come out of Winnipeg for sure.
So, did you ever think of having like a Burton Burger nip or a pop rock nip or something like that to add to the menu?
No, because I'm so inward focused and I don't think about anybody else. There's a big Earl.
That's
We
awesome.
introduced the big Earl. mm, I would say, oh, 10 years ago.
Hmm.
I introduced it as one of those things. It's can't remember the makeup now. It's 3 patties, 4-ounce patties, 3 pieces of cheese, 4 pieces of bacon, 2 different sauces, and whatever. And it's huge. It's huge. And we put a knife in the middle of it when we serve it, so it'll stay together and won't fall all over the place. And it was, it's one of those things you put on the menu and you wonder whether anybody's going to ever buy it. Well, it's been
Hmm.
on the menu now for 10 years because we sell thousands of them.
It's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, it is amazing. So I didn't get beyond that. I know, there's been Yale burgers and people have, used different names of people or places or whatever. Salisbury has the nip. Salisbury House has been around for 93 years now.
Hmm.
I hope to be involved for the 100th anniversary, by the way. But anyway, the nip has been the nip for 93 years, and it has developed its reputation, the cheese nip in particular, or the Mr. Big nip. It's developed its reputation. And so in other cases, and I often say this, you can get a burger anywhere, but you can only get a nip at Salisbury House.
Right.
So we don't have the need to maybe come up with some other names and whatever that might be catchier that people might remember, and take hold of and connect to. They're connecting to the nip, and that's what we want them to connect to. So,
Hmm.
and the Big Earl was sort of a throw in that's become somewhat popular, and it's not inexpensive. So, and people there
Hmm.
must buy it if they're buying it. And I think so.
Sure. So you're going to stick around for the 100th anniversary. Was there an actual Salisbury person, or how did the restaurant become Salisbury House?
Um, Ralph Irwin was a Chautauqua player in the United States.
Hmm.
And they toured Canada, including Winnipeg. When was in Winnipeg, he said, I can't get any food at night. So when I retire, I'm going to come and set up a business in Winnipeg.
Hmm.
When he retired, he came and set up a business in Winnipeg. He had no money, but he came and he set up this small little kiosk. He actually brought um, coffee, the concept of coffee to Canada, and he had the rights for Manitoba for the Silex coffee. But uh, prior to doing that, he decided what he would call his product. So in the United States, the hamburger was just becoming popular in the 1931 is when we're talking about, in the 30s, early 30s there. Well, he equated hamburger with Hamburg with Germany. He wanted to come up with something that equates with Britain, because England and France, of course, were key parts of Canada. So he came up with the Salisbury House, the Salisbury steak. And if you take a piece of a Salisbury steak, it's called a nip. So that's how he came up with the name nip and the Salisbury steak, which we still sell on our menu. And it started in 1931. With the Silex, he used to sell, everybody used to drink tea. So he had one teapot, and if you'd come in and say you'd like some tea, he'd say to you, you see the teapots with that person over there. When they're finished with it, I'll give it to you. But in the meantime, would you like to try this thing called coffee? And he actually grew the coffee business in Winnipeg from his very inception. Bottomless coffee comes from Salisbury House. Breakfast all day long comes from Salisbury House. 24-hour service comes from Salisbury House. The owners of Ray and Jerry's were schooled in Salisbury House before they became Ray and Jerry's. Salisbury House has been around. I mean, think about 93 years, what we've been through. I mean, COVID was awful, but floods aren't that much better. They're difficult for sure. The economy, the stock market crashes, inflation, all these things. Salisbury has come from 1931, 93 years without fail. There's a Salisbury House. So we're really sort of very proud, and Manitoba should be very proud of having a chain. There are chains, but the chains are national or international. But the only sort of local chain in Manitoba of any size is Salisbury House, and it's very active still. If you haven't been there, next time you're in Winnipeg, which is, by the way, not an unusual thing when I'm going to say, people get off the plane and go right to a Salisbury House, and to get the memory back of when they were here. Usually it's people who lived here, and maybe we were in Maine and Matheson and enjoyed themselves, and have that nostalgia feeling for a nip. And if I'm in town in Winnipeg, I'll be happy to host you at the restaurant, and we'll have some fun together.
That would be fantastic. Looking forward to it. So Earl, I think legitimately we're out of time now. So I thank you so much for coming on and giving us a great Winnipeg history lesson, and reminding us that great entrepreneurs like yourself keep coming out of Winnipeg. Why? Who knows?
Well, I think there's some reason that would be very interesting to investigate why so many entrepreneurs and other professions come out of the north end of Winnipeg in particular. There's I think there's a book written on that. And there's a reason, I think, that's worth exploring from your perspective at some point in time. And at some point, I'd also like to be able to talk to you about the philanthropy portion that I'm involved with. But we'll leave that for some point in time when you say, hey, I think I need somebody else for another podcast. Maybe I'll get this Barish guy to talk about the philanthropy part.
Sounds great. Would love to do it.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Well, you let me know, keep in touch with me so I know when this is going to be on, okay?
Yes, sir. And to all of you tuning in, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, share, teach me how to speak without slurring my words, and we'll see you next episode. Bye-bye.